The United States recommended on Sunday that all citizens in Ukraine depart the country immediately, citing Russia's extraordinary military buildup on the border. The State Department also ordered eligible family members of personnel at its embassy in Kiev to leave the country due to the deteriorating security conditions. So, how did we get here? Will there be a third world war? Will Russia invade Ukraine and will the NATO interfere? In this video, we are going to find out. What's the real conflict between Russia and Ukraine? What does Russia want? What does Ukraine want? What happens if Russia invade Ukraine? Will there be a third world war, or what is the current scenario? And without any further delay, let's get into the video. You are watching today's top. You may remember hearing about protests in Ukraine back in 2013. They happened in the capital city of Kiev. People were upset that then President Viktor Yanukovych didn't pursue a deal that would have strengthened the economic links between Ukraine and the European Union. But if we follow the root of the problem, well, it began in 1991. Ukraine was part of Soviet Union. Ukraine, a Texas-sized country wedged between Russia and Europe, which was part of the Russian Empire for centuries before becoming a Soviet republic, won independence as the USSR broke up in 1991. It moved to shed its Russian imperial legacy and forge increasingly close ties with the West. What does Ukraine want? In 2013, European Union and NATO said that Ukraine can join them if Ukraine proves that it is a standalone Republican country. But President Viktor Yanukovych rejected a deal for greater integration with the European Union, sparking mass protests, which Yanukovych attempted to put down violently. Russia backed Yanukovych in the crisis, while the US and Europe supported the protesters. Since then, several big things have happened. In February, anti-government protests toppled the government and ran Yanukovych out of the country. In April, pro-Russia separatist rebels began seizing territory in eastern Ukraine. The rebels shot down Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 on July 17, killing 298 people, probably accidentally. Fighting between the rebels and the Ukrainian military intensified, the rebels started losing, and in August, the Russian army overtly invaded eastern Ukraine to support the rebels. This has all brought the relationship between Russia and the West to its lowest point since the Cold War. Since the fall of 2021, tensions have become heightened. The Associated Press says Russia has been positioning an estimated 100,000 troops near Ukraine. Military equipment has been moved too. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned that there would be consequences for Russia if Vladimir Putin's military invades Ukraine. What does Russia really want? Russia is interested in Ukraine for a couple reasons. First, Ukraine would be a strategic cushion between Russia and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization member countries, 27 of 30 of which are in Europe. Those member countries include other former Soviet Union members like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Russia absolutely doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO, because the member countries agree that if one of them gets invaded, they're all supposed to get together and mount a defense. That wouldn't be great odds for Russia, especially since one of NATO's key missions is to prevent Soviet aggression. Second, Ukraine is a bigger agricultural powerhouse than you'd probably realize. In fact, it has been dubbed the breadbasket of Europe, and Ukraine is one of the world's top grain exporters and a global leader in production of products like sunflower oil and soybeans. Having control of that agricultural market would be a strategic victory for Russia, as would running Ukraine's well-placed seaports along the Black Sea. Russia already has one foot in the door in Ukraine, with separatists controlling some eastern industrial locations along the border. Since 2014, the two nations have been in a conflict that's become known simply as the Russo-Ukrainian War, which has basically been a war of attrition. On a semi-regular basis, Russian-backed separatists exchange gunfire with Ukrainian soldiers in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. To date, experts estimate as many as 14,000 people have died, possibly more. Ultimately, Russia wants NATO to have less control over Eastern Europe, including having the member countries pull back some of the battalions stationed in the region. And, the Russians definitely don't want Ukraine in NATO. Even if Ukraine isn't part of NATO, the country is still considered a strategic ally for the US, which is made clear on the State Department's website. But, how far the White House is willing to go to protect Ukraine remains a question mark. The New York Times says President Joe Biden is considering sending thousands of American troops, planes and warships to the Baltics and Eastern Europe. Supporters of that idea point to keeping strategic benefits, maintaining our diplomatic relationship, and sending a message to Russia. Critics say this is a way to drag us into yet another war that only benefits the military-industrial complex. And if you think sanctions against Russia are a better solution, European nations aren't necessarily sold on that. According to Bloomberg, Russia is the EU's fifth largest trade partner and its top supplier of oil and natural gas. As a result, the EU would prefer not to be in a sanctions battle, or any sort of battle, that could drive up gas prices this winter and end up hurting Europe as a whole. What happens if Russia invades Ukraine? Western nations have thrown their support behind Ukraine, but some responses have been tougher than others. The US and UK have supplied weapons, while Germany plans to send a field medical facility next month but will not transfer military equipment. There has also been much talk of sanctions aimed at punishing Moscow. Publicly, the US and European allies have promised to hit Russia financially like never before if Putin does roll his military into Ukraine. Leaders have given few details, however, arguing it is best to keep Putin guessing. Cutting Russia out of the SWIFT financial system, which moves money from bank to bank around the globe, would be one of the toughest financial steps they could take, damaging Russia's economy immediately and in the long term. The move could cut Russia off from most international financial transactions, including international profits from oil and gas production, which accounts for more than 40% of the country's revenue. The US also holds one of the most powerful financial weapons against Putin if he invades Ukraine, blocking Russia from access to the US dollar. Dollars still dominate in financial transactions around the world, with trillions of dollars in play daily. On the other hand, China states that they have given their support to Russia and will back them if they invade Ukraine. Will there be all-out war? The West is accusing Russia, which has massed 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border, of preparing to invade its pro-Western neighbor. Biden claims total unanimity on how to deal with Russia. The Pentagon has put 8,500 U.S. troops on standby for an Eastern European deployment, and NATO said it was sending ships and jets to bolster the region's defenses. It is uncertain whether war will break out between the two countries, but some analysts say Russia could move in on Ukraine to claim a quick decisive victory, and increase its bargaining power in future talks about NATO's expansion and spheres of influence. NATO and EU on one side, and Russia and China on the other, anything can happen. So will there be a war? Only time will tell. What we can tell is history. History of all that wars and the damage and destructions it caused to the world. Thank you for watching. Comment your opinion and like, share and support. See you again with a top topic.